Thank you for joining us for this episode. Today we're joined by Dr. Jackie Garlick, and she's going to be speaking to us about becoming an Instagram sensation, 2020 glance, and the future of eye care education on social media. Jackie, you have this Instagram, so tell us a little bit about this, the way you became such a rad Instagram sensation.
Well, I saw, I'll tell you, I saw a need and then I just filled that need. And the need was, this is how like every like story I feel like starts. It's like I was having trouble keeping up with optometry news and felt like I was like not paying attention to that. And I discovered like many of my colleagues felt the same. And even though we attended all of our CE, it's just like not the same as like there's a bunch of things that happen day to day that we just like don't know about. And so I actually started writing this optometry newsletter, 2020 Glance, and it's that still happens. That's just a once a week email that goes to your inbox. And then I was like, you know what I should do is like turn this into an Instagram and like meet people where they are. Like I was on Instagram all the time, and I was like, this might be nice if I could just get some like little snippets of news this way. And so then I just made it into like the news that I write about in the email. I just sort of then make that into an Instagram post.
Hi, I'm joined today with Dr. Holly Swain, and she's going to tell us why I care on today's Optometric Insights show. I was going to say, well, that's interesting because for us in optometry, we usually are uncomfortable even talking sometimes about prices of things in the exam room. So sales kind of seems like a big leap forward, but they must have seen something in you that they thought would have been a good fit for that.
Yeah, they definitely saw something that I didn't. And I'm glad they did because it did push me in that direction. And there was an opening with someone that's, God bless, they were willing to hire me as inexperienced as I was in that division. And I learned a lot from my mentor at that time and continued to grow. But I also found out it was exactly what my initial intuition was: is sales is not where I want to be. So
if I could, like, that's got to be an awesome opportunity for somebody to have, somebody that's a salesperson with the optometric background. That's got to be unbelievable because there's a lot of training on the specifics on the technology, but you kind of know clinically really where things kind of fit in, and that's got to be a huge kind of step forward in that role. You just don't have to have any of that background education.
Yeah, I think what helped me in that respect was knowing how the offices flow, knowing your technicians, the doctors, lanes, all those just different aspects of making the practice run easily, efficiently, and yet getting the technology you need in order to properly diagnose or manage. And that helped on that end of it. So I needed a lot of coaching on the sales part of it. But at least, yes, you're right. The clinical part, the practices, those things I had, I think, definitely an advantage in those respects that I didn't have to learn everything from scratch.
Hi, I'm joined with Dana DeVito. Talking about Is Private Practice Dead? So tell us a little bit more about your private practice club at Indiana University and really kind of what happens, like what occurs at the meetings? How often do you guys meet? What's it done for you over the past 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, absolutely. So with our private practice club, in addition to attending Solution, we have monthly meetings, and our meetings range from presenters like Optometric Insights, SLR, VSP, and other graduates from IU that share about their personal private practice. We cover finances, we cover marketing, and anything under the scope that can help students get into private practice. We have a whole board. We have a president, vice president, treasurer, secretary, member relations. So it's very involved, but we do our best to promote the events and then help set up our club members with the resources they need to go into private practice after graduating school. And every speaker that comes to present to us, we provide their contact information. We take notes at the meeting, and we make that available to all of our club members. And at IU, we average about like 80 to 90 students per class. And this year, the membership for our club was actually 100 students from between first, second, and third years. So we have a really big presence at this school, which is very exciting.
Hi, I'm Dr. Mila Brujic, and I'm joined with Dr. Allison Bozong, where we're going to be talking about ODs in the ER on today's OI show. This is so cool. Allison, I'm going to ask you to kind of just and I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here. I'm going to ask you in just a moment to give us kind of a few cases that were kind of really interesting to you over the last few days to few weeks. But give us kind of an idea of what the process looks like. Patient comes into the ER, and what does that kind of path look like until they see you? And then when they see you, kind of what happens with tests that you may need to order at that point?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when the patient arrives, they essentially come into the front desk at the emergency department. So we're within the Bascom Palmer's kind of freestanding building, and every floor is a different specialty. So we're on the second floor. So they come up to us, they check in the emergency room, and then pretty much right away, they'll see one of our triage nurses, who is basically the first point of contact from a medical perspective. That nurse is going to go through their vitals. So take their vitals, go through a chief complaint with them, and give them what we call an acuity rating. So that would be something ranging from a 1 to a 5. A 1 would be the most severe, most acute, most dangerous type of thing potentially. And a 5 is something that is less dangerous, less acute, less severe. So they're kind of ranged on that scale. And that's a tough job too, I think, trying to pick out, who's who.
Hi, I'm Dr. Mila Brujic, and I'm joined today by Dr. Debbie Feinberg and Matt Rosner, where we're going to be talking all about the finer side of prisms. So I know that there are patients that you probably helped and you change their lives. And I know that you probably have those people that you kind of hold on that pedestal and this is what can happen when you understand these people, find these people and provide them the appropriate care in terms of the prism correction that are required. Are there any situations that maybe are more resilient to the treatment or the benefits of the treatment? And if so, what are some of those factors that play into that part that this really isn't an individual that's a good candidate for this because of XYZ?
Right. So what I teach my colleagues when I teach them my work is I teach them you're going to be a headache sorter and a dizzy sorter. So when they don't respond to PRISM, we have other questionnaires that we utilize. For example, they might have autonomic nervous system dysfunction or dysautonomia or POTS, lack of blood flow to the brain. That's what's making them dizzy. So we actually have a tool that's a questionnaire for that. Then they may have something called vestibular migraine. There's a questionnaire for that. And then we have something called canal dehiscence. Sometimes they have an inner ear hole from their head injury. So in 2016, I began identifying how to actually sort those inner ear patients. And now I've sent over 80 of them to a very specialized doctor who looks at the deep inner ear structure. So it's allowed me to sort them properly, peel off the layer that I can do or not, and then send them on to the important referral.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the OI Show. Today we're joined by Natalie Chai. We're going to be speaking about clinical signs that lead to radiofrequency, IPL, thermal pulsation, or PRP. So I want to get a little granular here. So you go through all this diagnostics. You've done inflammatory, you do, all of your keratograph testing, you do your vital dyes and so forth. What is it that you see in a patient's eye that drives you towards IPL or RF? Right. So those two treatments, are something that is continuing to gain in popularity. And a lot of practitioners are like, I don't know, I don't know if that's going to be something. Is it just the cosmetics? Because so many people are like, oh yeah, I'll bring that in and, get people to look really good. Or is there something diagnostically that you say, oh, I see this, that, and the other thing that points me towards doing this particular type of treatment, IPL or RF?
Yeah, definitely. And so this is exactly the way that I would explain it to a patient, is that with IPL, as you know, what it targets, where it shines is inflammation, right? The chronic inflammation portion of dry eye. So then what we look for then, of course, is the ocular rosacea. So the telangiectatic vessels along the lid margins. The key word, of course, is you got to look for it. But I mean, a lot of times, a lot of dry eye patients will already have it along their lid margins. And so that's number one thing. And of course, with the inflammatory, it does confirm those inflammatory markers on the ocular surface. And so that's certainly for sure number one. The ocular rosacea automatically in my mind will be the IPL. The other thing too, on that same note, dovetailing from that, is that because we know, inflammation is the driving force of chronic dry eye. Even if I'm not seeing too much, telangiectatic vessels or whatnot, I still consider IPL because, like an angry person, if your eyes are constantly, chronically, angry, for instance, whatever you do on top, it's not going to be effective. So it's like an angry person, got to calm them down, got to calm the eyes down first with, say, IPL. Therefore, what you do, at home, for example, will have a better fighting chance to work.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. Today, we're joined by Kayla Ashley. We're going to be speaking about the art of sales on the OI show. So, explain to me what the thing was that you saw in the practice you were working in that made you say you're leaving a lot of money on the table. Like, what was that
Yeah,
was like, hey, we can fix this?
the biggest thing is being able to have the biggest thing was the team's ability to sell eyewear. So I had realized really quickly that selling is kind of deemed as like this bad word in eye care.
Yeah.
And had already been taught in my previous jobs outside of eye care that it's not really selling. It doesn't come off as selling if you're really trained well on what it is that you are selling.
Mhm.
And I found that there was, at least in that practice, and now I found throughout our industry, that there is a huge lack in us being able to teach doctors and opticians how to properly sell. I think that in our industry, actually, I know that in our industry, we are the only medical field that has so much relying on retail sales. You can go into a heart doctor and you can have your heart surgery done and you're going to be like, that is the best doctor in the entire world. But then you go into your eye doctor and they can dial in the most amazing prescription for you. And if you don't purchase any eyewear, not necessarily even from that doctor or not, but if you don't purchase any eyewear, you'll never be able to see the true benefits of what that doctor was able to provide you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. Today, we're joined by Dr. Mania Madan, and we're going to be speaking about blood biologics and platelet-rich plasma. I want to dig in a little bit on this practice scenario. How long have you been digging your teeth into the dry eye arena, right? It seemed like kind of all of us kind of dabbled for a little while, but then there becomes this line in the sand where most people draw, and they're like, I'm going to be a dry eye doctor. This is going to be a major emphasis. How long has that been happening for you?
It's actually kind of a cool story, Dave. It was actually your lecture that I heard back in 2012 or 2013. You'd come to Vancouver at one of the BCDO conferences, and you gave this really great lecture. Back then, talking about the tear film, talking about the meibomian glands, and looking at the meibum quality that's starting to come out. And that was really fascinating. And I thought, you just delivered this information so well that it intrigued an interest, in me. I had just moved back from the United States after doing a residency in Texas, and which was very disease heavy and lots of dry eye, and so just was trying to figure out what I wanted to do in Vancouver at that time. I knew I didn't want to be in just in a private practice, and there's nothing wrong with that, but just with all the training that I've had and all that stuff and where my interest was. And so when I heard your lecture, I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And so I kind of took it upon myself to start looking at more reading material, maybe some journals, some studies and articles, and trying to just educate myself, and then started investing in some of the diagnostic equipment, right? How do we start, diagnosing this in our patients? And then came the treatments after that. And it's also really fascinating how much dry eye has changed, right? So there was that interest, but then also this technology of diagnosis and treatment started to really catch up, that we could be really excited, not just for the science of it, but also how we can help patients. And so that's kind of where the journey started.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. Today, we're joined by Dr. Melanie Denton-Dombrowski, and we're going to be speaking about taking our dry eye clinics to aesthetics. I have a dry eye clinic, and I love dry eye. I've been doing it for a long time. I have an IPL in my practice, and I have been exclusively using it for dry eye since I started. But there's other things I can do with it, and there's other things I can do to help my patients. In Washington State, an esthetician, a master esthetician, is qualified to do IPL services. And I thought, right now our doctors are doing all the IPL. It's taking a lot of time, and it's a lot of fun, but how can I change this? And my friend Melanie has already done what I want to do. So walk us through this process of going from a dry eye to doing aesthetics, and ways that helps patients, and how you're, helping them with their dry eye by being more involved with that too.
So this all started for me really early. So even when I was working for other folks right out of school and residency, I noticed that I was getting these questions about, well, which eye makeup is good, which one is safe. This was like back in 2009, 2010, fresh out of school. I'm like, people are asking me this, and we didn't spend 1 second on this in optometry school. So way back then, I was like, I feel like there's an opportunity there to have sort of this eye safe beauty concept that we're just not really hitting on. We're not learning about it in school. We're not doing it. Well, all these years pass, and I started practice, and I start in the dry eye space. And now using IPL, which is a photofacial, intense pulse light came from dermatology. It started as a photofacial. It targets chromophores, so hemoglobin, melanin. And guess what? When you start doing it for dry eye, as I'm sure you've seen, patients get great aesthetic results that they're really pumped about. And so now that conversation is front of mind for you and for patients. I found myself starting to say, like, yeah, we can do this dry eye treatment. And oh, by the way, it's also going to clear up your rosacea a little bit.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. Today, we're joined by Dr. Melanie Denton-Dombrowski, and we're going to be speaking about taking our dry eye clinics to aesthetics. I have a dry eye clinic, and I love dry eye. I've been doing it for a long time. I have an IPL in my practice, and I have been exclusively using it for dry eye since I started. But there's other things I can do with it, and there's other things I can do to help my patients. In Washington State, an esthetician, a master esthetician, is qualified to do IPL services. And I thought, right now our doctors are doing all the IPL. It's taking a lot of time, and it's a lot of fun, but how can I change this? And my friend Melanie has already done what I want to do. So walk us through this process of going from a dry eye to doing aesthetics, and ways that helps patients, and how you're, helping them with their dry eye by being more involved with that too.
So this all started for me really early. So even when I was working for other folks right out of school and residency, I noticed that I was getting these questions about, well, which eye makeup is good, which one is safe. This was like back in 2009, 2010, fresh out of school. I'm like, people are asking me this, and we didn't spend 1 second on this in optometry school. So way back then, I was like, I feel like there's an opportunity there to have sort of this eye safe beauty concept that we're just not really hitting on. We're not learning about it in school. We're not doing it. Well, all these years pass, and I started practice, and I start in the dry eye space. And now using IPL, which is a photofacial, I mean, intense pulse light came from dermatology. It started as a photofacial. It targets chromophores, so hemoglobin, melanin. And guess what? When you start doing it for dry eye, as I'm sure you've seen, patients get great aesthetic results that they're really pumped about. And so now that conversation is front of mind for you and for patients. I found myself starting to say like, yeah, we can do this dry eye treatment. And oh, by the way, it's also going to clear up your rosacea a little bit.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. Today we're joined by Dr. Patricia Fulmer, and we're going to be speaking about cold start practice, process, and metrics. So in starting the practice from scratch, you have all these things that you think it's going to be like or that are going to happen. What is the thing that has surprised you that has been the best? Like, what was it that you knew it was going to be good, but this is something you didn't know was going to happen that you absolutely love about cold start practice?
Yeah, I think that feeling that you get when you get your first returning patient, the one that they didn't follow you, it's that, wow, they really want to be here, or that first referral from a patient that has told their friends or their family or saying, I love it here, I'm going to send my family. When you're an associate or when you're, maybe buying into a practice and it's kind of built up, you certainly have a lot of work to do, but when you start it completely from the ground floor, every single thing really is yours, and you're making those decisions. You're trying to build that relationship and to know that it's working by people referring and coming back to you. It's a very humbling but really rewarding moment when that happens. So
yeah. So on the flip side, there was something you didn't know that you didn't know, and it was like, this sucks. What was the thing that has been like the absolute epitome of worst that you've encountered that you didn't anticipate?
Oh goodness. Honestly, I think for me it was, so in school they do a good job, right? They introduced us to optical, but I had been in practices that either didn't have an optical because they were medical based, or did, but they were established enough that their opticians kind of knew everything, and we didn't really have that much of a hand in it. So
thank you for joining us for this episode. Today we're joined by Dr. Joanna Cutter, and we're going to be speaking about misperceptions around vision therapy. Vision therapy, it accounts for a small percentage of optometrists that are out there. My bride does vision therapy, as you know, and as many of you listeners may know. But it's just not thought of at front of the mind for most optometrists. And I think one of them that we miss a lot is neuro-rehabilitative eye care. And I think there may be, and I'd like to hear what you have to say, but I think it may be that many of us just don't know what to do for those patients, right? You try to get their glasses right and try to get their progressive right or whatever it is, but all these patients, they're just struggling, and they come in and we get them glasses and they see 20/20, but where are we missing the mark with these patients? Like, what can be done for those types of people?
Yeah, and I think the biggest challenge with our neuro patients, especially the acutely neuro patients, like soon after a stroke or concussion or brain injury, is that their systems are very, very sensitive. So a lot of times we're working in what I call the realm of little bits. So just small prescriptions or small prescription changes can make huge improvements in how they are functioning. So for example, if a patient usually doesn't wear glasses and they complain of dizziness with head movement, they may benefit from a lens that's just a plus 0.25, which is going to reorient and there's their vestibular ocular reflex, like the way that head and eye movement can be out of sync, and that just a little tiny plus lens can get it back in sync. But you try giving them a plus 50 and they might almost vomit, right? So they've got a very little tiny window of comfort. And I see that with near lenses as well. A lot of times I'm just giving a small prescription. You tell them just go buy, you tell a 28-year-old who's had a concussion, just go buy some over-the-counter readers. There's no way that they can
handle that much lens power in front of their eyes.
Hi, today I'm joined with doctors Megan Blemker and Kester Nahan from 4C, where we're going to be talking about the foresight into the future of AMD. Megan, the 4C Home AMD monitoring program, this is kind of really where the application of this digital healthcare provider kind of comes into play. Share with us a little bit about the technology and the program and how it actually works with you guys.
Certainly. And you brought up the AMSR grid, which, as we know, we've been using as a standard of care for a long time now. It does detect those catastrophic changes, but 4C Home is very sensitive and it will detect more subtle changes. It does that with a proprietary technology called preferential hyperacuity perimetry, or PHP. And this monitors for changes in metamorphopsia or visual distortions within the central 14 degrees of the macula. So we know that hyperacuity is much more sensitive than Snellen, that standard clinic eye chart acuity, because of the way that it functions within the visual system. So we are monitoring these patients, and many times they will not notice that they've had changes, but the system will be able to pick that up from this sensitivity.
So Megan, they're actually getting a test sent to their house, and you guys are walking them through how to set it up and everything, correct?
Exactly. So once the referring doctor has identified a good candidate for 4C Home, so we are monitoring these very high-risk patients. So these are the dry intermediate AMD patients at risk of converting to wet AMD. So if they have the diagnosis code in right, left, or both eyes, and their best corrected vision is 20/60, 60 or better, then they're a good candidate for 4C Home. And so what the referring physician does from that point is send in the prescription to our monitoring center, and we take it from there. We like to say that we're an extension of your practice. And what I mean by that is once we receive the patient's prescription, their referral information, including their insurance information, we will verify their benefits, let the patient know what, if anything, that they will pay for this service on a monthly basis. And then if the patient agrees to move forward with the program, our team will ship to the patient the device.
Hi, I'm Dr. Mila Brujic, and we're joined with Dr. Katie Greiner, where we're going to be talking about the crossroads of keratoconic care. So how do you make the judgment call now when it's time to correct these individuals, whether or not you go with standard soft, hybrid, small diameter or corneal GPs, or scleral or larger lenses? How do you make that clinical judgment call in the lifetime of this patient?
So as soon as I start seeing any signs of keratoconus, I'm probably not gearing myself as much towards a soft lens anymore. You know, a lot of them are coming in wearing toric soft lenses and saying they're just not getting that quality of vision. You know, there are aberrations that are bothering them. So they might have quantity, but not quality. I speak a lot and write a lot about the importance of just a rigid lens trial on these patients. This can be quick and dirty. You take a mean K, throw on an average shaped contact lens to their cornea, and if they tell you in the chair, wow, I can see better once you over refract that, the quality is better, you know that a specialty type lens is probably a better option than a soft lens. I am a fan of starting very early on a scleral lens. I do fit some hybrids. I will fit a corneal GP, but I really am a fan of going pretty much straight to a scleral. And I'll start with a real small diameter, you know, like a 15.2 diameter, 15.6 diameter lens that provides good comfort, easy for the patients to maneuver, and really, Mila, the quality of vision is top notch in those patients compared to a soft option.
Is there a reason why you'll go to a scleral lens before you do a corneal GP or a hybrid lens? Is there clinical logic behind that, Katie?
You know, I really just think it's patient adaptation. A lot of these are young patients, and the scleral provides a lot more comfort. There's a lot of, you know, comorbidities with dry eye and other things that can be affecting them. And so the scleral provides that, you know, wetting of the eye and that comfort as well. And so I just think today's day and age, the technology is there. I love a good GP lens. If I have a myope that's been wearing a GP since, you know, 1980 and they love that, I'll continue to fit that. But if it's a new fit, I really do tend to go the scleral route.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. Today we're joined by Dr. Aaron Roof, and we're going to be speaking about the improvement of your patient's comfort by adding astigmatism. Aaron, here's the thing. When I take a patient and they've got a diopter cylinder, I don't want to correct it. So I just, give them a half a diopter extra minus. Are you telling me that I shouldn't do that?
I am telling you that you shouldn't do that. There's actually some really good evidence out there. A great study by Stephanie Cox a couple of years ago came out where there's a clinical trial where they compared low astigmatism, low toric lenses compared to spherical lenses in patients that had like average, like a diopter, maybe a little over a diopter or less of astigmatism. And while the vision was the same in both lenses, so the acuity was essentially the same, what the patient read on the chart, the patient subjectively preferred the toric lens to the spherical lens. So I think that's a good takeaway for us as optometrists. It's really easy to just get caught up in our exam room chart and say, well, they're seeing 20/20 with both. But subjectively, what patients often prefer is very different than what we might expect based on just our exam room chart alone.
But it's an aspheric lens, right? So it compensates for all that cylinder. That's
I don't think we can say that anymore, David. No, I don't think we can say that. That might have been something, 10 or 15 years ago when the toric lenses we had weren't as good as the toric lenses we have now. Okay. But, our resistance to prescribing toric lenses is probably more based on sort of old practices and assumptions we had about older toric technologies, and not based on the really good lenses that we have now available to us. So we really should be correcting those low astigmats. 75, I've even had some patients with a half diopter of astigmatism who prefer to have the toric lens over the spherical lens that has the spherical equivalent. So it's really something as a practitioner you just should be offering. If you see that patient you have in their manifest refraction and their autorefraction has a diopter, has 0.75 diopters of astigmatism, they can really visually, subjectively, and I would argue comfort-wise, benefit from a toric lens. That same study by Stephanie Cox, they gave those patients the CISS as well and found that patients had improved CISS scores with the toric lens compared to the soft spherical lens, indicating that their visual comfort was better with the toric lens.